Okay, so we're now going to look at the for loop in PHP, and we're going to be creating a little example by looping through numbers 1 to 10, and then we'll also look at how this might be useful with other data types as well. So for example, looking at not just incrementing an integer, but also looking at perhaps looping through an array, and how we might want to do that with a for loop, just as an example to show that this doesn't just have to be as we were explaining it initially. So let's say we want to loop through numbers 1 to 10. Well, what do we do? Well, let's define our for loop first and look at the basic syntax. And all it is it's the for keyword and brackets here. Now inside here we have three different expressions. We've got an assignment, we've got a comparison, and then we've got an increment. So this sounds a little complicated, but all we're really doing is we're defining where we want our variable to start. We want to define the condition of the loop, so when we want this to loop and when we don't want it to loop, and then we're going to increment that variable, or we could in fact decrement the variable. We'll look at that as well in a moment. So let's just suppose we want a variable x and we want that to equal 1. We use a semicolon after this, and then we choose the expression that we want. So we basically want to say, well, x is less than or equal to 10, because we're looping through numbers 1 to 10. Then we want to increment x. So we could say x plus plus, or we could say x equals x plus 1. It doesn't really matter. Now inside of the for loop, this will run 10 times now, because we want to make sure that x is less than or equal to 10. Therefore, for the first loop, x will be 1, the second x will be 2, the third x will be 3. Then by the time we get to 9, 9 will run, 10 will still run because this evaluates to true, and then afterwards it will be 11, and therefore it will evaluate to false. So now what we can do is say echo x and just append a break onto there, and when we refresh we see that we get numbers 1 to 10 output, and obviously in our source code we have this listed separated by breaks. So what happens if we want to say count from numbers 10 to 1? So let's change this around. So we want to start x at 10. We then want to say while x is while x is greater than or equal to 1, we want to decrement x and then output x. So we're starting at 10 now, and we're basically just reversing the way that we're working. Now with a for loop, we don't just have to work exclusively with numbers like this. What we could in fact do is we could create an array of names. So let's add 3 names to this list. Now what we could do is we could say we want x, or let's just say we want to output the names here. So let's get rid of this, get rid of this. So we can still have our counter. So we could say while x equals 1, we want to say while x is less than or equal to, in fact let's start x at 0 because we are using obviously a 0 index array, while x is less than or equal to the count of names. Now, if we think about this a little carefully, count of names will basically return 3, when in actual fact we only want to go from 0 to 2, just simply because we have 0, 1, 2. We don't have 0, 1, 2, 3. So we could either say count names minus 1, or we could say, well, we could do this a little differently, but let's keep it at that for now. And then I'm going to say x plus plus. Now what I can do is I'm going to echo x just to demonstrate this, and again append a break onto the end of this, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh. We get 0, 1, 2. Now that's expected, but what we actually maybe want to do is output Alex, Billy, and then Dale. So what do we do here? Well, we know that Alex is at 0, Billy is at 1, and Dale is at 2. So all we need to do is we need to say names and use our array element access to say x. So for each one then we're accessing this element's items by 0, 1 and 2, which is Alex, Billy and Dale. So that's how we can use for loops to just basically increment or decrement a number, but we've also looked at a more practical example where we might want to use a for loop to access, for example, elements of an array.